In your opinion, what is the root of the conflict? So you get right into it.
Well, there's a political root and a cultural religious root. Politically, there are two peoples, the Palestinians, who became a people gradually after the 1920s, and the Jewish people, which is an old people who regard the land of Israel, Palestine, as theirs. There is a conflict over the territory, the land of Israel itself, not areas within it, but the whole land of Israel, a territorial issue, political issue, in which both national movements claim that piece of land, which is very small, 8,000 square miles, as their territory. And this is a basic clash between two national movements, which is unique because mostly national movements clash over border areas between the two states, Germany and France over Alsace-Lorraine, but here there's two movements clashing over a whole piece of territory. It also has a religious cultural aspect in that the Palestinians, essentially a Muslim people, regard the territory as holy, sacred Islamic land, and the Jews regard the territory as theirs, and the Palestinian Arabs regard the Jewish settlers as an infidel, alien, culturally alien presence, which is a pollution in their terms. And so there's a cultural religious aspect to this conflict which makes it even more difficult to resolve than were it simply a political issue.
Right, okay. Is there ever a possibility of a peace process with increasing settlements in the West Bank?
Say that again.
Is there a possibility of a peace process with increasing settlements in the West Bank?
Yes, look, Israel and the Palestinians negotiated peace. They didn't reach a settlement, but they negotiated peace in stages of a settlement in the 1990s while Israel was building settlements and expanding settlements. I don't say that the building of the settlements is good for the peace process. It's bad for the peace process. It's an obstacle to peacemaking. It's psychologically devastating in terms of the Palestinians, but that doesn't completely negate the possibility of peacemaking. But I still think that the main problem isn't Israeli settlements or the building of them, because after all, Israel uprooted the settlements it had in the Gaza Strip. When it wanted to withdraw from the Gaza Strip, it just did. And they could uproot equally settlements in the West Bank. This isn't the key problem. The key problem is that the Palestinians want all of Palestine for themselves. Both the Fatah and the Hamas believe that all of Palestine should be theirs, no part of it should belong to the Jews, and therefore reject a two-state settlement. And this is the key issue and the key problem in resolving the conflict.
Right, okay. As you know, the UN calls for a right of return to all Palestinian refugees.
No, it doesn't.
How does this fit?
No, this isn't true. The UN in 1948, in December, passed a resolution, the UN General Assembly, which endorsed the right of refugees to return or receive compensation in their lieu. But the UN doesn't call for the return of Palestinian refugees, and the General Assembly's votes are recommendations. They're not resolutions in the sense of something which must happen. Only Security Council resolutions have that force.
But how does this fit into the idea of a peace process if Palestinian refugees are not?
Well, the return of Palestinian refugees, and there are 5 million, almost 5 million on the United Nations books. The PLO maintains there are 6 million Palestinian refugees. If the Palestinian refugees return to the area which is the state of Israel, there is no state of Israel. It becomes a majority Arab state. So the Jews, of course, who wanted a state of their own, not a state shared with Palestinians or to live as a minority in an Arab land, which is something they once tried and weren't very happy with. The Jews don't live in Arab lands any longer. They want to maintain a Jewish state. They say the Arabs have 22 countries, 23 countries. We would like one Jewish country. If the Palestinians achieve what they call the right of return, and millions of them return to the area of the Jewish state, there is no longer a Jewish state. So it's not something Israel can agree to in a peace treaty with the Palestinians. On the other hand, the Palestinians do demand, and think it's just that they demand, that the refugees be allowed to return. The refugees from 48, their children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, all of whom are designated refugees. And this is an essential demand of the Palestinians.
Right, as an Israeli citizen and historian, in your opinion, what is the solution to the conflict?
Well, there is a reasonable solution on the table, has been for years, for decades. It's more or less embodied in the Clinton parameters of December 2000, a two-state solution, one Jewish state in the land which the Israelis turned into their state in 1948, a Palestinian state next to it in the West Bank, Gaza, and East Jerusalem under Palestinian sovereignty, the two states living, coexisting side by side in peace. This is the solution. And refugees should essentially be either should be allowed to return to the newly constituted Palestinian state, in other words, the West Bank. Much of the West Bank would become available for that restitution of refugees because Israel would have to withdraw its settlements and settlers from the West Bank. Other Palestinian refugees should be settled in place in Jordan, Syria, Canada, or abroad as well. And maybe a token number could be resettled in Israel itself, but essentially the problem would have to be solved in place or elsewhere. And this two-state settlement, as proposed by Clinton and agreed to by Barack, was rejected by Arafat in the year 2000. It was resurrected in talks between Olmert, Israeli Prime Minister, and Abbas, the president of the Palestinian Authority, in 2008. Again, Abbas said no to the two-state solution.
Do you believe there's no possibility of a one-state solution?
There is. If the Israelis drive out all the Palestinians, you can have one big Jewish state in Palestine. If the Palestinians drive out all the Jews from Palestine, you can have one big Palestinian state, Muslim.
But there's no possibility of the two groups coexisting together under one...
You could theoretically have a binational state in which there's some sort of parity between the two communities, but the Palestinians don't agree to it and the Jews don't agree to it. They don't want to live in a bipartisan state in which there's sort of parity between the two communities. Each of them wants a state of their own. The Palestinians, all of Palestine, the Jews are willing to make do with the area of Israel, but they don't want to live in a jointly governed state. You could have Jews living as a minority in a Palestinian-dominated state, but the Jews won't want to. They'd rather live in America. They've tried, as I say, life in Arab states. It's never been very pleasant or comfortable, and they no longer live in Arab states. So a two-state solution is the reasonable solution. A one-state solution is a figment of several intellectuals' imagination or of Islamists who believe they can take over all of Palestine.
Okay. You have often been criticized for a supposed shift in your political opinions. How do you explain this?
I don't think I've shifted. I've always believed in a two-state solution, and I still believe in a two-state solution. This is the reasonable, just solution to the conflict. Where my shift, what has happened in my thinking politically, is that whereas in the 1990s I thought maybe the Palestinians had at last acquiesced in Israel's existence and were willing to share the land in a two-state solution, after the year 2000, when they said no to a two-state solution, from that point on I became pessimistic about Palestinian readiness to agree to a two-state solution. That's shifted, that I see the Palestinians differently.
Okay. As you know, the Arab Spring has dominated every sphere of Middle Eastern life throughout 2011. How dangerous is this period for the Israeli state, and what is the feeling within the country about the events taking place?
Well, Israelis are apprehensive, as I said in the talk. The Israelis are apprehensive about the Arab Spring because A, they're not sure it's a spring. Nobody knows what it's going to be. It could be an autumn, it could be a deep winter. We just don't know. There's been a lot of enthusiasm. The crowds in the streets in Tahrir Square and other places appear very well motivated, looking towards democracy and so on, but they may not really represent the masses of Egypt or even Tunisia or other places. It's not clear what will emerge from this upheaval in the Arab streets. So far, the worst dictatorships seem to hold out very well. In Iran, they've held up very well. In Syria and in Libya, they seem to be holding up. The weaker dictatorships have fallen. The West has been undermined its position. And in Egypt, which is a crucial country in terms of Israel, it has a peace treaty with Israel. The peace treaty is being gradually undermined by various Egyptian moves. So the expectation is that relations with Egypt could worsen even to the point of the eventual annulment of the peace treaty. And this is a problem, a major problem strategically for Israel. And
with the ongoing revolutions in the region, how does this affect Israeli national security?
Well, it affects, it's mostly at the moment focused on Egypt, and it affects Israeli national security to the extent that the Mubarak regime, while perhaps not a particularly pleasant regime in terms of its own population, it had a cold peace with Egypt, but it maintained non-belligerency with Israel. The overthrow of that regime, which meant a stability in Israel's south along the border, and if you like, even security for Israel along its southern border, the overthrow of that regime means that now things are open. And Israel's south may no longer be secure, which means that any events in the north or east which might threaten Israel, it can't rely on a safe, secure, quiet southern border, which is a real problem, security-wise.
So do you believe there's a possibility of an impending attack or war in the region? No,
the immediate problem, well, there's two immediate problems. One is the Iranian nuclear project. If it reaches fruition, the actual bombs, that will be a devastating event in terms of the region and Israel's existence, perhaps even. The other problem is the Palestinian drive at the moment for a declaration of statehood, a unilateral declaration of statehood, and then endorsement of that declaration by the United Nations. And this could devolve into widespread rioting and even a third intifada, and this is definitely an immediate security concern of most Israelis, I should imagine. But overwhelming this, clouding this, is the Iranian project, which is threatening to Israel's very existence, which the Palestinians in the short term are not.
I'm not sure if you've been following recent events in Turkey. The Justice and Development Party won for the third consecutive time, and they're considered mildly Islamist. What does this mean for Turkish-Israeli relations?
I don't know. Look, Israeli-Turkish relations were good in the 1990s, were good in the early part of the 21st century. They've cooled over the past years under this Erdogan government, but Erdogan has so far resisted the temptation of severing diplomatic relations. There are still ongoing military relationships and, I assume, intelligence relations between the two countries, but one can't know what will happen in the future.
Do you believe Turkey can play a leading role in the peace process?
No. Turkey has established itself publicly as siding with the Palestinians and with the Syrians in relation to Israel. Israelis will not trust Turkey to be an honest broker, and therefore any Turkish efforts to become some sort of mediator are bound to fail.